War films shape how we remember battles we never fought. But what if Hollywood's most heroic charges, noble speeches, and clean-cut victories were myths? From sanitized trenches to impossible rescues, movies have blurred truth with spectacle. Yet, a few rare films dared to tell it right. Tonight we uncover 10 war movie myths and 8 films that shattered them. Pearl Harbor, 2001. The romance that overshadowed reality. When Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor stormed theaters in 2001, it promised an epic about the Day of Infamy. Instead, audiences found themselves watching a love triangle with explosions in the background. The film grossed hundreds of millions, but history buffs and critics tore it apart. Why? Because the movie replaced real history with Hollywood melodrama. The attack sequence dazzled visually, yet Bay's film distorted key facts. Fighter planes were portrayed with impossible maneuvers. The Doolittle raid was reimagined as a daring payback fantasy. Soldiers and nurses became soap opera characters, while the sheer chaos, confusion, and tragedy of December 7th were minimized. Even Ben Affleck later admitted the story leaned too heavily on romance. Behind the scenes, Disney wanted a summer blockbuster that blended war spectacle with Titanic-style romance. The studio demanded young stars, love drama, and massive explosions. Accuracy became secondary. Survivors of Pearl Harbor expressed disappointment, saying the film didn't honor the men who died that day. In truth, the real story was already dramatic enough: unprepared defenses, devastating losses, and a stunned nation awakening to war. By twisting that into a love triangle, the movie created one of the biggest war myths of modern cinema. The tragedy of Pearl Harbor is that the real history was cinematic, heartbreaking, and unforgettable without the need for Hollywood fabrication. The Green Berets, 1968. John Wayne's Vietnam fantasy. When John Wayne released The Green Berets, America was deeply divided over the Vietnam War. Wayne wanted to make a patriotic film that showed U.S. soldiers as unshakable heroes. The result? A movie drenched in myth-making that critics called propaganda. Unlike later Vietnam films that exposed the war's chaos, Wayne's movie painted a black-and-white story of good versus evil. North Vietnamese fighters were caricatured as villains with no depth, while American soldiers were noble defenders of freedom. The film's battle scenes were staged like classic Western shootouts, with Wayne's soldiers bravely holding the line. But reality was far messier. Behind the scenes, the Pentagon helped fund the film, providing equipment and consultation, but only in exchange for a script that glorified the U.S. mission. The beaches of Georgia doubled as Vietnam jungles, robbing the film of authenticity. Meanwhile, soldiers returning home from Vietnam criticized the movie for ignoring their real struggles, confusion, moral dilemmas, and disillusionment. While The Green Berets was a box office success, it hardened myths that Vietnam was a noble, winnable war. Later films like Platoon and Apocalypse now dismantled those illusions, exposing the brutal fog of war that Wayne had denied. The myth of the Green Berets is its refusal to look reality in the eye. In its place, it built a glossy fantasy that history would eventually tear apart. 3002006. Stylized valor versus historical truth. Zack Snyder's 300 electrified audiences with its slow-motion combat, muscled Spartans, and the unforgettable roar. This is Sparta. It became a cultural phenomenon, inspiring everything from memes to gym workouts. But beneath the stylized battles lies one of Hollywood's biggest war myths. The Battle of Thermopylae was real, but 300 turned it into a hyper-masculine fantasy. The Spartans were shown as flawless warriors standing against monstrous Persians. In truth, the Persians weren't faceless beasts. They were an empire of diverse soldiers, engineers, and cultures. The Spartans, meanwhile, were not democratic heroes. They were a society built on slavery, military dominance, and harsh control. Behind the camera, Snyder leaned into Frank Miller's graphic novel rather than historical accuracy. Persian war elephants, deformed villains, and impossible fight choreography made the story more like a superhero movie than a war chronicle. Historians criticized the film for reinforcing stereotypes and glorifying violence. Yet, despite its myths, 300 carried a strange power. Its stylization captured the mythic spirit of battle, the idea of standing against overwhelming odds. That's why audiences embraced it. It wasn't about facts, it was about legend. The irony? By leaning into fantasy, 300 became one of the most enduring war myths of modern cinema, blurring the line between truth and spectacle. U-571, 2000, the Hollywood heist that stole British glory. When U-571 hit theaters, it sold itself as a tense submarine thriller about U.S. sailors capturing a German Enigma machine. The movie thrilled audiences with claustrophobic battles, torpedo dodges, and heroic sacrifices. But one glaring problem: this never happened. In reality, it was the British Royal Navy that first seized an Enigma device, not the Americans. HMS Bulldog and HMS Aubreyada, manned by British sailors, accomplished the daring feat in May 1941, over half a year before the U.S. even entered the war. By transferring the credit to American sailors, Hollywood rewrote one of Britain's proudest wartime achievements. Behind the scenes, director Jonathan Mostow admitted the change was made to appeal to American audiences and secure U.S. Navy support for filming. The Pentagon allowed use of submarines and facilities, but only if the script glorified U.S. actions. British politicians, including Prime Minister Tony Blair, expressed outrage at the historical distortion. Veterans, who had risked their lives, felt their sacrifice had been erased. Despite the controversy, U-571 won an Academy Award for sound editing and remains a gripping film. But its myth that Americans, not the British, captured Enigma spread widely, shaping how millions remembered the war. The tragedy isn't that the movie entertained, it's that it diminished the bravery of real men who changed the course of history. Flags of Our Fathers, 2006. The photograph that rewrote memory, Clint Eastwood's Flags of Our Fathers, set out to tell the story behind one of the most iconic images of World War II, the raising of the flag on Iwo Jima. The film follows the lives of the Marines who appeared in Joe Rosenthal's photograph, exploring how they became reluctant symbols of American victory. But the truth behind the photo and the men in it was far murkier than Hollywood admitted. The famous image wasn't actually the first flag raised that day. Hours earlier, another flag had gone up, but commanders insisted on replacing it with a larger one to boost morale. Rosenthal's photo captured that second moment, not the original triumph. For decades, even the identities of the men in the shot were debated. The U.S. government itself misidentified some of the Marines, reshaping history through a mixture of mistake and myth. Eastwood's film highlights the pressure these men faced when brought home as national heroes, paraded on bond tours while many of their comrades still fought and died. Yet the movie simplified the politics around the photo, portraying it as pure patriotism rather than a carefully managed symbol for wartime propaganda. Historians argue the film downplayed the government's role in myth-making, instead focusing on personal struggles. The irony? Flags of Our Fathers tried to deconstruct a myth while still relying on mythic storytelling. It gave us a moving drama, but not the full, complicated truth of how one photograph reshaped America's memory of the war. The Patriot, 2000. Mel Gibson's War That Never Was. When The Patriot arrived in 2000, it was hailed as the American Braveheart. Mel Gibson played Benjamin Martin, a farmer-turned-soldier who rises to lead militias in the Revolutionary War. The movie delivered sweeping battles, emotional speeches, and brutal British villains. It was a box office success, but also one of the most myth-ridden war films ever made. The character of Martin was loosely inspired by Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. Yet Marion was no noble farmer. He was a slaveholder, and his tactics were far more ruthless than the movie suggested. By turning Martin into a virtuous family man fighting purely for liberty, the film erased the darker truths of America's revolutionary heroes. Even more controversial was the depiction of British soldiers as sadistic monsters. In one infamous scene, they lock civilians in a church and burn it down. Historians quickly pointed out this atrocity never happened in the Revolutionary War. Critics accused the film of demonizing the British to manufacture drama. Behind the camera, director Roland Emmerich admitted he wanted an American epic that stirred patriotic pride, even at the cost of accuracy. The result was a sweeping spectacle, but one that blurred myth and history until they were nearly indistinguishable. The emotional power of The Patriot is undeniable, but it reminds us that cinema often chooses legend over truth when shaping national memory. Red Tails, 2012, Heroism Simplified. When George Lucas produced Red Tails, he wanted to honor the Tuskegee Airmen, the all-black squadron that fought both the Luftwaffe and racism at home. The movie gave us rousing dogfights, sleek CGI, and a proud message about African-American heroism. But for all its good intentions, it created a myth by simplifying a far more complex story. In the film, the Tuskegee pilots are portrayed as nearly flawless warriors who never wavered in courage or skill. While they were indeed extraordinary aviators, the movie exaggerates their record, suggesting they never lost a bomber they escorted. In reality, while their performance was outstanding, they did lose a handful of bombers like every squadron in the brutal air war over Europe. Behind the scenes, Lucas poured $93 million of his own money into the project after studios refused to fund a movie with an all-black cast. His passion was clear, but so was his desire to create an uplifting crowd-pleaser rather than a gritty historical account. Critics praised the intent but criticized the script for turning real men into comic book heroes. The myth of Red Tails isn't malicious, it's aspirational. Yet by polishing away the flaws and struggles, the film risks reducing flesh-and-blood heroes into symbols, robbing their story of the raw truth that makes it powerful. Braveheart, 1995. Freedom, painted faces, and historical fiction. Mel Gibson's Braveheart became a cultural juggernaut, winning 5 Oscars and immortalizing William Wallace's cry of freedom. But historians have long pointed out that Braveheart is one of the most historically inaccurate war films ever made. From the start, Gibson's Wallace is draped in myth. The movie portrays him as a commoner when in reality he was a minor noble. The Scots in the film wear kilts and blue-face paint garb that wouldn't appear until centuries later. And the love affair between Wallace and Princess Isabella? Impossible, she was only a child at the time of his rebellion. Behind the scenes, Gibson admitted he prioritized drama over fact. Battle scenes were staged for spectacle rather than accuracy, with Scottish warriors charging shirtless into combat. Historians slammed the film for misrepresenting both Scottish and English history, while critics noted that the script bent timelines beyond recognition. Still, audiences loved it. Braveheart gave viewers a story of underdog defiance, one that resonated far beyond Scotland. The myth became stronger than the truth. Tourism in Scotland surged, and Wallace was enshrined as a near-mystical hero. The irony? Braveheart is remembered less as a history lesson and more as a national legend, proving that cinema often feeds our hunger for myth rather than fact. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Brutal realism, but not the whole truth. When Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan premiered, veterans wept in theaters. The opening D-Day sequence, 20 minutes of chaos, gore, and terror, was hailed as the most realistic depiction of combat ever filmed. For once, Hollywood seemed to get war right. But even here, myth slipped in. The story of Captain Miller's squad risking everything to rescue one soldier, Private James Ryan, was inspired by the real-life Nealon brothers. But the U.S. military never launched such a mission. It was an invention of screenwriter Robert Rodat, crafted to explore the question, is one man's life worth many others? Behind the scenes, Spielberg's quest for authenticity was relentless. Veterans were consulted, actors endured a week of boot camp, and weapons were made functional for realism. Yet, while the combat felt brutally honest, the central story was mythic, a moral fable, not a historical event. Still, the film's impact cannot be overstated. It changed how war movies were shot, influenced countless directors, and sparked renewed interest in World War II history. It may not be factually precise, but its emotional truth, the terror, sacrifice, and brotherhood of war, rang louder than any inaccuracy. Saving Private Ryan shows us that even the most realistic war films weave myth into memory, but sometimes those myths help us feel the weight of history. Apocalypse Now, 1979, Madness Made Myth. Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now is often hailed as the greatest war film ever made. Loosely based on Heart of Darkness, it drags viewers deep into the jungles of Vietnam and into the surreal, nightmarish psyche of war itself. Critics and audiences embraced it as both masterpiece and myth. The film doesn't claim to be factual. Instead, it mythologizes the war, transforming real chaos into cinematic fever dreams. Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando, isn't a literal figure from history, he's an allegory for the corruption and moral decay that consumed the conflict. Scenes like Robert Duvall's surf-obsessed Colonel Kilgore capture the absurdity of war through exaggeration, not reportage. Behind the scenes, the production itself became legendary. Typhoons destroyed sets in the Philippines. Martin Sheen suffered a heart attack. Brando showed up overweight, unprepared, and improvising lines in the dark. Coppola nearly bankrupted himself and confessed, "My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." The result is a mythic portrait of war's insanity, blurring fact and hallucination until audiences can no longer tell the difference. Critics hailed it as terrifyingly true not because it captured historical detail, but because it distilled the essence of Vietnam into unforgettable imagery. Apocalypse Now proves that some of the greatest war films aren't about facts at all. They are about the myths we create to survive what can't be fully explained. War films don't just show battles, they shape memory. Some twist truth into legend, others dare to reveal raw reality. Myths can inspire, but they can also erase. Which war movies shook your beliefs? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe for more hidden truths Hollywood doesn't want you to see.